Imagine the ground you are standing on right now was once a swirling ball of fire. There were no trees, no humans, and no animals, only ash, molten lava, and barren rocks. Yet today, this planet teems with millions of species, including us humans, who consider ourselves the masters of this world. But the real question is, where did we come from? Have we always been here? How did the first spark of life ignite on Earth? When did the first human take their very first step? Who was that first person? Was it a man or a woman? Are we truly descendants of apes, or is there a deeper, darker mystery hidden behind our origins? And the most shocking question of all, is our evolution still happening? Are we destined to transform into a completely new species in the future? Today, we will peel back the layers of these mysteries, from the birth of the Earth to the rise of humanity. Let's explore the incredible journey that brought us here. About 4.5 billion years ago, our entire solar system was nothing more than a massive cloud of dust and gas. Over billions of years, these tiny particles collided, forming small rocks, which eventually clumped together to create our planet, Earth. But this Earth was nothing like the world we know today. It was a scorching inferno. Meteors rained down from the sky, while volcanoes erupted relentlessly from below. Rivers of molten lava flowed everywhere. Toxic gases choked the air, and the sky was stained black with thick smoke. No trees, no rivers, no life. Only fire, ash, and total destruction. Then, time took a dramatic turn. For billions of years, torrential rain poured from the heavens. It was so intense that it began to cool the burning lava. This endless rainfall filled the massive hollows of the Earth, creating the very first oceans. As the volcanic rocks cooled into solid ground, the Earth finally found a moment of peace. Yet there was still no sign of life. The world was just a vast landscape of barren rocks and endless water. But deep within the darkness of those oceans, something tiny and miraculous was about to happen. How did life open its eyes for the very first time? How did life finally draw its first breath amidst a world of lava, water, and chemicals?
The story now brings us to the exact moment when Earth was about to come alive. Oceans had formed, but everything was eerily silent. No trees, no animals, no humans. However, deep within the ocean depths, near volcanic vents, something extraordinary was brewing in the boiling water. These tiny creatures were the first to learn how to create food from sunlight, a process we know as photosynthesis. This triggered the greatest transformation in Earth's history. These microbes began releasing oxygen. Yes, the very same oxygen we breathe today. Slowly, this oxygen dissolved into the oceans and then began filling the atmosphere. Earth's toxic air was finally becoming breathable. The real game of life had now begun. But as the air filled with oxygen and life flourished in the seas, a massive question remained. Would these tiny creatures ever leave the water and step onto dry land?
Then, about 500 million years ago, a miracle occurred. Some marine creatures began to adapt, evolving their bodies to breathe outside the water for short periods. Among them were the amphibians, who crawled out of the oceans for the first time. This was a historic moment. Life had finally set foot on dry land. From there, nature accelerated at an unbelievable pace. These tiny creatures grew in size and took on diverse forms. Some climbed trees, some raced across the plains, and others took to the skies. This was the true explosion of life. Fast forward to about 230 million years ago, when the most legendary creatures in history appeared, the dinosaurs. These giants became the undisputed kings of Earth. Some stood 40 feet tall, while others could run at speeds of 100 kilometers per hour. For 160 million years, dinosaurs ruled the forests and the fields. But then came the era of total annihilation. A massive asteroid struck the Earth, wiping the dinosaurs from the face of the planet. Yet, in that very destruction, the journey of the next generation began, the one that would eventually lead to us. Coming up, I'll show you how, after the fall of these giants, tiny mammals rose to claim the Earth, and how one of them eventually stood upright as a human. The story is now racing toward its ultimate climax. The reign of the dinosaurs had been overthrown. 65 million years ago, when that massive asteroid struck, it didn't just kill the giants, it flipped the script of Earth's entire history. The planet was left desolate, but even in the darkness, tiny creatures were still breathing. These were the mammals, who until now had lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs. Small enough to live in burrows and capable of surviving on very little food, their size became their greatest strength. Slowly, they began to claim the Earth as their own. Then, about 50 million years ago, some of these mammals began to climb trees. Their vision sharpened, their fingers evolved to grip branches, and their brains grew larger. This was the dawn of the primates, the era of ape-like creatures. Living in the canopy, they became faster, smarter, and more agile. But then, nature shifted once more. About 7 million years ago, the climate in the African jungles began to change. Dense forests turned into vast grasslands. Some of these ape-like creatures descended from the trees and ventured into the open plains. This led to a historic transformation. They slowly began to walk on two legs. With their hands now free, they started gathering food and crafting tools. Then, approximately 2 million years ago on the African continent, Homo erectus was born, one of our earliest human ancestors. They mastered the art of fire, became skilled hunters, and engineered their own tools. This is where the human journey truly picked up speed. But a massive question remains. What was the exact moment a human first recognized themselves as human? Who was the very first person, a man or a woman? And how did our brains grow so powerful that we went from living in dark caves to walking on the moon? The story has reached its peak. We're entering the era of the modern human, Homo sapiens. And trust me, this is the part you absolutely cannot miss. About 300,000 years ago, the true avatar of humanity emerged on the African continent. Their brains were significantly larger than their ancestors, and their power to think was on a whole different level. They weren't just hunters anymore, they were strategists. They hunted in organized groups, and most importantly, they began to develop the very first languages. Now, this brings us to the biggest question. Who was the first human? Was it a man or a woman? According to scientists, the DNA of every single human alive today can be traced back to a single female ancestor known as mitochondrial Eve. She lived in Africa about 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. So, technically speaking, the first modern human was a woman, and we are all her descendants. Of course, men existed alongside her, and together they wrote the next chapter of the human saga. But how did our brains grow so large? It's fascinating. When our ancestors mastered fire and started cooking food, it became easier to digest. This saved massive amounts of energy, which the body redirected to fuel the brain's growth. This was the turning point. Our intelligence skyrocketed, leading to the creation of tools, art, religion, and the foundations of culture. Think about it. A creature that once swung from trees is now launching rockets into space. A species that once sought refuge in dark caves is now planning to build colonies on the moon and Mars. Next time you look at yourself in the mirror, remember, millions of years of history are standing right behind you. Once humans stood on their own 2 feet, stopping was never an option. We left the jungles to build villages, then cities, and now we are staring at the stars.
We went from lighting fires in caves to living in the age of artificial intelligence. We once worshipped the moon as a god. Today, we've walked on its surface. But the greatest truth of all is that the human journey is far from over. We are still racing through an evolution where the future remains a mystery. Who knows what's next? Perhaps we'll settle on distant planets or use technology to reshape our very existence. But whenever you look at yourself, remember, you aren't just a person. You are the living legacy of the entire Earth.
Imagine waking up millions of years ago. No smartphone, no clothes, no shelter. And the most terrifying part? You are surrounded by lethal predators. Could you survive in such a world? You'd have to forage for food in the wild. No bed to sleep in, only cold caves shared with snakes and scorpions. No language, no rules, just one single goal: survival. This is the story of our ancestor, whom we now call the early human. He didn't just learn to exist, he began to understand the world. By sparking fire from stones, crafting tools, and challenging the beasts of the wild. Let's step back into the dust of time, an era where clocks and calendars didn't exist, only the relentless flow of time itself. About 2 million years ago, a unique creature emerged on the African continent. He wasn't a powerful predator, he had no razor-sharp teeth or lethal claws, but he possessed one thing: a brain. Small yet evolving, he was Homo habilis, the handyman. He was the first to shatter stones to create tools, sharp flakes to carve meat and defend himself. Then came Homo erectus, the one who could stand upright. Imagine, while other animals were bound to the ground, this early human could stand tall and look into the horizon. He could spot danger from afar. He could track his prey. And from here, the first great human migration began. Leaving Africa, they slowly pushed into Asia, Europe, and beyond. There were no paths, no maps, only the sheer will to survive. Every new land brought new challenges: harsh weather, strange predators, and unknown territories. But this early human refused to back down. He laid the very foundation upon which modern humanity stands today. But what was life really like back then? Where did they live? What did they eat? Let's travel to a time where living simply meant making it back alive at the end of the day. Think about it. When there were no houses, no doors, and no roofs, where did the early human call home?
He had only one choice: the lap of nature. Sometimes deep within dense jungles, sometimes in massive caves, anywhere he could hide from the biting cold, the torrential rain, and most importantly, from lethal predators. Caves were his only sanctuary. Warm in the winters, cool in the summers, a perfect natural shelter. And if no cave was found, he would huddle within the massive roots of ancient trees or vanish into thick bushes. Just anywhere to survive one more night. There were no rules for living, no fixed family, no fixed place. Home was simply wherever he found his next meal. And remember, there was no scheduled time for sleep. At the slightest sound of a predator, he had to wake up and run for his life. Existence was synonymous with constant alertness. Today, we sleep peacefully in our homes, but back then, every single night was a fresh battle to stay alive and stay safe. But when there was no fixed home, where did the food come from? Let's talk about that most basic necessity: food. Today, we contemplate what to eat and what to avoid, but for the early human, the question was much simpler: find anything to fill the stomach. Initially, his diet came from the wild: roots, tubers, wild fruits, dry leaves, and even insects. But then he realized that animal meat provided much more energy. That was the birth of the hunt. However, hunting was never easy. He had no guns, no nets, just a sharp stone or a wooden spear in his hand. Sometimes he hunted alone, other times in a pack. He learned the art of the ambush, crouching in silence, stalking the prey, and striking at the perfect moment. One mistake, and he could easily become the hunted. When a kill was made, the entire tribe shared the feast, sometimes drying the leftovers for later. Slowly, he understood that satisfying hunger required more than just brute strength. It required a sharp mind. This realization taught him to track animal footprints and identify where the water flowed. Everything was learned through the raw lens of experience.
Today, we simply open a refrigerator and grab a meal. But back then, putting one's life on the line for a single meal was a daily reality. In a world where food and shelter were such brutal challenges, what did the early human do to protect himself? How did he craft his first tools? In the wild, strength alone wasn't enough. He needed an edge. The early human first shattered stones to create sharp flakes, blades to carve meat and fend off predators. Then, by binding a sharp stone to a long wooden stick, the spear was born, humanity's first true hunting weapon. Then came the discovery that changed the course of destiny: fire. Perhaps a bolt of lightning set the forest ablaze, and the early human observed that animals fled in terror. He realized that fire offered warmth, protection, and a way to cook food. Slowly, he mastered the art of striking stones to create a spark, igniting dry grass. With tools and fire combined, life became safer, smarter, and more sustainable. But imagine a world with no words. How did they communicate? It began with gestures, hand signals, facial expressions, and guttural sounds. A sharp cry for danger, a leap of joy for a successful find. Over time, repetitive sounds like hun, ha, or ugh began to hold specific meanings. These were the seeds of language, the humble beginnings that eventually laid the foundation for every culture and tongue on Earth. The human was no longer just another animal. He could think, and he could transform those thoughts into symbols. From a barefoot wanderer seeking refuge in caves to a species planning colonies on the moon, look how far we've come. Every tool he made, every fire he lit, and every sound he uttered was a stepping stone for the next generation. Our smartphones, the internet, our homes, and our cars, everything is a gift from that early human's curiosity, struggle, and sheer will to learn. So, whenever you are in your comfort zone, take a moment to remember that first human who struck a stone in a dark, cold cave. He didn't just light a fire, he gave humanity its first ray of light.